Good morning. My name's Don Helin, and I'd like to welcome you to our discussion of memoirs and also our new anthology, Voices from the Pandemic. And I'm really pleased that we have two of our Willow Valley residents will be here to read their memoirs. Okay, you ask, what is a memoir? Well, a memoir is a journey through the writer's past. It's not an autobiography, because an autobiography is your entire life, but it's just a slice of life. And it may be 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years. In our case, our time period is going to be, for the anthology, is going to be from the 1st of January through the end of June. Those 6 months when the pandemic started, and we took it up till the end of June. Now, if you decide that you want to write a memoir, there's a bunch of different things that you need to consider. First of all, do you have a powerful story to tell? And if you're going to talk about our pandemic, I would suspect that you do. Secondly, you need to ask, who do you think is going to read this memoir? Is it going to be written on a legal pad with pencil and pen for your family? Or is it going to be a book that you hope to become a bestseller? You need to think about that. The other thing that's really important is, do you have access to the background materials that you're going to need in order to do your memoir? And the other one that's always kind of interesting, can you take care of the fallout that might come from your family if somebody has hurt feelings? What I'd like you to do for a minute is just think back. Think back in history and some of these critical times in the life of our nation. How about back when President Kennedy was shot? Everyone knew where they were at that time. I bet I can ask anybody watching this program, and you can tell me a little story about what you were doing then. I was in Germany as a brand new Army officer. The other is 9/11. Where were you during 9/11? Well, for me, my wife and I were sitting on our porch just northwest of Harrisburg. Phone rings, and my daughter is on the phone from San Antonio, and she says, "Dad, are you all right?" I thought she was kidding. I said, "What do you mean, am I all right?" She said, "Hey, turn on the TV," and I did, just in time to watch that second plane hit the center. What a terrible time that was. So I would suppose to you that everyone is going to remember what they were doing during the coronavirus pandemic. And having written a memoir about that, others could understand what you were doing and how things were going. And also it might be something to share with your children, your grandchildren, great-grandchildren, who knows. So what I'd like to do is just take a few minutes and give a short background on the development of the memoir, and then we're going to read a few stories and excerpts from the memoir. During my time in the military, I must have written a gazillion, subject to letters and Army regulations and all that sort of stuff. When it was time to leave the Army, I realized nobody's going to pay a lot of money in the civilian world for the guy who can write Army regulations. Fortunately, I found an ad in the paper from the Washington Post that they were doing a travel writing symposium. My wife and I love to travel, and I thought, hey, that's going to be great. What I learned has stayed with me my entire writing career. There's two pieces to travel articles. One is a travel brochure, and a travel brochure is the facts. What's the population? How many stores are there? What are their hours? What's distances? These sort of things. These are the facts. The travel article itself is much more than that. It attempts to bring readers to that place. And that's what I like to do. And what I use and what I learned to use was creative nonfiction. And creative nonfiction are fictional techniques that we can use to kind of spruce up and make more exciting nonfiction. And what you're trying to do is make readers want to come to go to that place. You know, let them feel the heat from the sun. Let them hear the brook that you've seen. Smell the flowers. If there's sand, maybe the crunching under their feet. Let them feel what's there. So using creative nonfiction helps overcome what could be sometimes fairly boring fiction. And this is important background to our memoir discussion. Elaine and I left our home in Perry County and came to Willow Valley in early 2019. At that time, I had just published my fifth suspense novel. And when you pick up a novel, you expect to have a good story. You expect to be entertained. You really expect that you'll be able to follow along with a wonderful story. What we're talking about today is, wouldn't it be nice if you could do the same thing with a memoir? I'm still writing travel articles for the Berg and a number of other newspapers and the internet. There's a big field for that. When I got to Willow Valley, I was so impressed with the terrific stories of my friends' experiences. So in the summer of 2019, we started a travel writing course right here, workshop right here at Willow Valley. And that went on for about 6 months, and we had a great time. Came up with some terrific stories. And then the virus hit. And sadly, everything died down. But remember, the key point I want to make is a memoir blends the accuracy of nonfiction with the storytelling tools of fiction. And we'll be getting into more of that. So in mid-March, my publisher and I began doing Zoom workshops because everything had been closed down, all our travel was canceled, and there's a number of things that we discussed in class. And if you haven't yet had a chance to get that worksheet, I suggest you go to presenter@willowvalley.org for that summary sheet. And we have a summary of the points we were trying to make at that workshop up on the board for you to take a look at. First, you want to talk about research. You need to go to the small things that caught your attention. Details, it makes people feel like they've come into the scene. Because this is what I call, going back with a memoir, is almost like taking your reader by the hand and leading them back into that time period. It may be just a few months ago, or maybe when you're in Vietnam or whatever, but those small details can be very important. But you have to be careful, be very careful that you don't get bogged down in research, because some people do. And you remember, you've got to keep writing. The structure of memoirs usually, it's not always, but usually run either one of two ways. First of all, you've got the chronological. And the chronological starts at some point, and something ends, and that causes something else to happen, which causes something else to happen. And so it's a chronological spread of events over a certain period of time. The other one is episodic. And episodic is little vignettes that you do, and then you kind of stitch those little vignettes together into a memoir. For example, for some of you that saw the Veterans Day program, I had a little vignette of the day Bob Hope came to Vietnam. Now that I could stitch together into a memoir. That's just one thing that I might want my family or friends to know about. Character. Motivation of the character is absolutely critical. What you want to know is what drove characters into the story and doing what they were going to do, and why do they do that? So you have to understand your character. And if you have a number of characters, it's important that you not only understand your character, but you share that information with your readers, and also any other characters. They have to understand a little bit about what makes these characters tick. And that helps them understand the story. Another very important aspect or technique is dialogue. I'm sure you all remember when you were in high school or college, reading those textbooks. You have one paragraph and these mega paragraphs. And what you want to do is to get away from that. And you'll hear that in a little while as the two of our readers do a nice job of adding dialogue to try to add interest and break up those big paragraphs. Point of view is to make sure you let your reader know whose story it is and who's telling it. And I think that's important because what we want to do, if you can, is tell the story through your character's eyes. You don't want to say that, the waves crashed on the beach. What you might want to say is something like, describe it in her own words. The crashing waves reminded her of a time at the beach as a little girl, running in the waves with her brother. What a twit he happened to be. So that brings you in, and so you're not telling all the time, you're showing your reader what's going on, and that's what people like. They want to get involved in the story. Senses, the last one, so many people forget about the senses. Everybody deals with sight. That's kind of the cardinal sense. And it can dominate the scene if you're not careful. The sun set on the horizon like a fiery cyclops. And you keep seeing stuff. But what about the other senses? What about sounds? If you go to the beach and you just stand there and shut your eyes, you can hear the waves crashing on the rocks. Or touch. Maybe you're walking on the beach and you can feel the crunch of the sand underneath your feet. I'd like to stop for a minute with smell because that's incredibly important. Smell is the sense that's most tied to memory. For example, let's suppose that you go somewhere and you smell this soap. You say, "Ooh, what is?" And then it reminds you of the soap your grandma used to use. And all of a sudden that takes you back to that summer you spent there where you first learned how to swim. And of course, taste. You have all different kinds of things. It can tell you what people are eating, what they're drinking. The cold beer felt good going down his throat or whatever. Okay, so what we did after these workshops, my publisher put out a call for 1,500-word memoirs on their experiences since the pandemic. And I agreed to audit the anthology, even though I knew it was going to be a little bit of a challenge. We received a number of memoirs, and it was a lot of fun to read all of them. We received memoirs from healthcare workers, from educators, from writers, from musicians. And one that I particularly enjoyed is we received a number of memoirs from sixth graders from one of the schools in West Virginia. And I think if you read through some of those, you get a whole new perspective, perhaps a little more than you thought. So after we finished putting this together, we published the memoir, and we're absolutely delighted that it won an honorable mention at the New York Book Festival. So it's not only a collection of interesting memoirs from a wide variety of people, but it's well put together and a good memoir. So what I'd like to do is just read short excerpts from about 3 of the memoirs, and then I'd like to turn it over to my good friends that are here. One from healthcare workers. And this one makes you realize and thank your healthcare workers. I remember when this was first starting in March and April, we'd be watching, spend a lot of time watching CNN, and you start to see everybody outside applauding the healthcare workers. Well, this young lady is a physical therapist, and she was pressed into service because of the hospital was almost overwhelmed, as a site manager on one of the wards. And her memoir is titled Tidal Wave. So you can kind of understand where this might be going. And let me just read a couple paragraphs. And I think it will seed in your mind what some people went through during the story. I was not prepared at all to see nursing home patients and fellow employees suffer and die from the disease. I saw the death of too many people to count. It was not a good death either. Family was allowed to come in for 1 hour at the end of life. Sometimes we were praying for them to get there in time. Sometimes, and then we had to assist them with donning and taking off their PPE, while trying to give them the privacy they needed to say goodbye. Pastors talked with the dying people and the families either through glass doors or some used walkie-talkies. I saw husbands and wives die within days of each other. I saw patients make the decision not to be intubated. Then when the oxygen hunger drove them out of their mind, fear, they asked for it. Of course, the outcome was not that different. I was in charge. Just think of what this did to her mentally each day. She talks more about that in the anthology. I was in charge of the process of making sure the body was properly cared for and sent to the morgue. I had to wipe down the body bags and the stretchers. When the gurneys were wheeled out of the room, I felt, now this is really a great way to pass along what she felt. I felt the fading warmth and firmness of the flesh beneath the plastic of that biohazard bag. I definitely did not sign up for this and was not in any way prepared. This was a destruction caused by the tidal wave of the virus. And I think if you go through and read Marie's memoir, you get a real feeling for what many of our healthcare workers went through. And unfortunately, as we all watch the news today, we're talking about hospitals being overwhelmed again. And so the cycle could well start again. So we talked about healthcare workers. How about musicians? I'd like to read the end of a short memoir from Joe Coleman. Joe Coleman was a member of the Platters, who was a lead singer for 23 years, and was a regular at the Sarah Hotel in Las Vegas, performing those popular songs such as, you probably remember these, Only You, My Prayer, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, and The Great Pretender, and many other #1 hits. And let me just close out Joe's memoir as he's kind of trying to figure out what it all means. As an entertainer, he says, the consequences and outcomes of the pandemic are coming fully into focus. We had cancellations after cancellations as our gigs go. It was slow at first. Initially, there were postponements. And then people said, well, let's just wait and see. Then slowly, by late March and early April, the cancellations notice started coming in until I looked up one day and realized all of my gigs were gone through the end of 2020. There is nothing more devastating for a performer than to have nothing on the calendar for the foreseeable future. What do I do when you can't even go out and get a straight gig? How do I take care of my family and keep a roof over my head? I'm still in the process of answering these very difficult questions. So stay tuned. There's still a crisis in progress. Now, there are we tried to lighten it up a little bit, I know I have many friends here who are fishermen. And Rick Robinson is a fly fisherman extraordinaire. As a matter of fact, he's about to publish a book on it. And his story is COVID Smovid, let's fish. And he points out, as he works his way through the memoir, the fly fisherman, number one, there's always socially distant. Because when he's casting that fly rod, if you get anywhere around him, you might get nicked. Then when you clean fish, if you've ever cleaned a lot of fish, you'll know that your hands really smell. So fishermen always have to be washing their hands. And finally, to protection from the sun, they wear masks. So what Rick is saying is that they're already doing it, and it's a cute and it's kind of a funny story. And I think in many ways, that kind of helps take a little bit of the burden off you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce two good friends who've been working on their memoirs and were able to contribute to this memoir. First, my friend Joyce Nisley. Joyce's memoir is called The Wacky Danger. Quick bio. Joyce Nisley became interested in writing while she was a college freshman, when a story about childhood drew praise from her English instructor. Although she received a BA degree in English literature, her career was primarily centered on her family's winery. And many of you are aware of the Nisley Vineyard and Winery, which is just north of Columbia. It was established in 1976. Now retired, she is working on a collection of stories which will chronicle situations and characters associated with her career. And I'll have to say, I'm certainly looking forward to that. So without further ado, Joyce?
Hi, good morning. The wacky side of danger. Meeting Phil was risky. The news media carried reports of danger. The virus is still out there, officials warned. Wear a mask, stay 6 feet apart. Online dating could also be dangerous. Don't do it, my sister warned. As I drove with determination in my Swedish Saab, glancing periodically at the clock and concerned about being too late, I was thinking even more about being an exemplary citizen through 12 weeks of complying with stay-at-home orders. I had been dutiful because worried about becoming infected by this dreaded COVID-19 and thereby transmitting to my family and staff or my newfound retirement friends. That would have made me a hated person, whereas being loved was my preference. Now I was ready to relax a bit under new rules of openness. As I pulled into this tree-lined lot, I considered that I was ready as possible under the circumstances. I had my mask, my wallet, and lipstick. I was well rested and armed with several witty remarks if needed. My biggest challenge would be not to break down in tears. Stress can do that, although rarely. We had agreed to an early dinner on the patio at a local restaurant, not far from where I lived, but a 45-minute drive for Phil. I parked beside the building, put on my mask, and walked to the back of the building, where I expected to find the patio or Phil. I was glad to see a large entrance sign, but no sight of Phil. I proceeded into the patio, which turned out to be a beautiful grand courtyard with south of the border styling. A few people were seated, but not Phil. "How many are in your party?" the hostess asked. She was sitting at the end of a short counter, leaning slightly over the tablet of names, with her long, pretty hair falling gently forward. "Just 2, I said. "I thought you might require a reservation." "It's not necessary," she said. I could picture her smile hidden by her mask. Her manner was accepting, not indifferent, as might be expected if resentful for mostly empty tables. I decided to wait outside near the entrance sign, where I found a selection of rustic wooden benches. I chose the one that was partly shaded. This was a perfect day, June 16th, 2020 to be exact, with very warm sun and cool breeze, my favorite weather. My face was in the sun, but the mask was covering my nose, in need of protection. My dermatologist would be happy. I was content to be outdoors, where the sun-averse virus does not lurk as readily. I was glad I had worn jeans, clean and well-pressed. Maybe my top was not the perfect choice, though. With bell-shaped sleeves starting at the elbow, it was lovely, and it was expensive. I should be cautious about the splintering wood against my back. Although I was not keeping score exactly, I would need to evaluate all aspects of the evening carefully at the end. I began to grow a bit restless, tired of watching a mostly empty parking lot and wondering what might have happened to Phil, when a black sedan came into view and parked at the far end of the lot. A tall, impressive man with gray hair and gray mustache appeared from the car and walked slowly toward me. I waved, and so did he. This was Phil, a stranger, except for a few brief messages online and an hour-long phone call yesterday. This was the man who could be the love of my life, or break my heart, or any other number of wild scenarios that I did not want to consider and improper to mention here. He was holding a mask in his hand. We introduced ourselves, avoiding a handshake or a hug because this was the new normal way of being friendly, which equated to being just the opposite. The hostess kindly showed us to a shady table, which we requested. I chose a chair, and Phil sat beside me. I was about to suggest making more distance between us when he actually moved his chair closer to me. This simple action could cost me my life, but I was more interested in his blue eyes and willing smile. I removed my mask, as allowed when seated. We could order a bottle of wine, Phil suggested. I said, ordinarily I would love to share that with you, but I stopped drinking wine. I was wondering whether I had told him during the lengthy phone call. I would like to have lemonade, I said when the waiter asked. Disappointed that it was not available, I ordered a club soda instead. Phil had the same. Phil said, so you own a winery, but you don't drink wine. I believe that I was drinking too much because our wine is too good. My last 2 sips were on January 1st, 2017. I could have continued telling the story, but we had a lot of ground to cover. This was something like a job interview. The goal was to present your best fascinating self without giving away anything that could disqualify you. Meanwhile, learning the other person's life history, listening for red flags, and avoiding the distractions of personality and charm. On top of it all, the music was loud, so we needed to talk loudly, which is a risk factor for transmitting the virus, especially troublesome where either person is unknowingly asymptomatic, like now. I'm trying to figure you out, he said, leaning back. I'm a realtor, and I learned to read people fast, but I'm not sure about you. That might be because I'm an introvert acting like an extrovert. I learned recently that I can be happier that way. However, unlike a true extrovert, the result is not just happiness, but exhaustion. He leaned close to my face to speak confidentially. I'm an introvert too, he said. Are you exhausted like me? I replied, hopefully. No, he admitted. Then he added, you're cute. We were midway in eating the fajitas that we ordered, and I remembered part of the phone conversation when Phil said he did not drink much but liked a glass of wine with dinner. We decided to order one for him, and the waiter placed it beside me. Phil invited me to taste it. No thanks. I shook my head and moved the glass over to him. He gently pushed the glass back toward me, and with his face close to mine, he said with charm, go ahead, a sip or two won't hurt. A loud alarm went off in my head. Listen, you have blue eyes, and I'm beginning to think you're the blue-eyed devil, I said, scaring even myself. My eyes are gray, he said. I swallowed a bite of comforting refried beans. I must admit, this is hard for me because you have a strong personality. You do bring out my comic side, though, and I like that. He disagreed about his personality and resumed telling me about his life, like singing in the church choir, as well as marrying and divorcing the soprano. I was listening intently. You seem more open now. I can see it in your face, he said. Compared to what? Do you mean when we met at the entrance? Yes, you seemed uptight at the beginning. I was wearing a mask, I blurted, and we both had to laugh. Phil quickly began to tell me about dog training and how he found his current dog, a German short-hair pointer. Can your dog read? I asked. She shakes her head back and forth, but I doubt she can read, he said. I knew a dog who could read, and I wrote a story about that. May I send you a copy? I'd like that. He looked at me suspiciously. My next story is about a man I hired and fired due to an altercation and, what? Altercation? He burst into laughter. Who uses words like that? His reaction to the word hit me like the funniest thing I had ever heard, and instantly I was attacked by a laughing fit. When your face goes into contortions and you can hardly breathe. Worst of all, you also lose bladder control. If I had been concerned earlier about crying, now I was really in trouble, but able to put the brakes on just in time. Sorry for the laughing fit, I said. My twin is the only other person who triggers it. I talk too much, he offered. Tell me about your twin. Are you identical? I talked for a while, and he continued to drink his wine at a snail's pace. After 2 hours, the interview was winding down. As the evening came to a close in the parking lot, saying goodbye was difficult. I was unsure that I should continue to see this man who intrigued me. But wackiness aside, the virus in the man could adversely determine my own new normal. I could very possibly turn into a crushed online dating casualty, if not also a sorry COVID-19 victim. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. I enjoyed your story, and I'm always interested how in the world you go on a blind date during a pandemic. Our next person is Dick Thee, longtime friend and member of the writers group. Dick has served as a parish pastor, a campus pastor, and most recently a professor of theology at Lancaster Theological Seminary. He was married to his wife Jean for 51 years until her, 61 years, until her recent death. He has 2 sons and 4 grandchildren. Now retired in the Willow Valley communities, he is working on his memoir, centered on his participation in the Selma March for voting rights. Dick?
COVID-19 emerged in Wuhan in December 2019. It rampaged through the city, leaving death and despair in its wake. The gruesomeness and deadliness of the disease sent shivers down my spine. Still, I rationalized, Wuhan is half a world away. Chinese epidemiologists claim to have it contained, and Chinese travelers aren't even permitted to enter the USA. With the threat thus neatly sequestered in a remote corner of my mind, I approach the new year resolved to enlarge my circle of friends and participate in more of the myriad of activities available here in Willow Valley. I registered for Tai Chi, for the Willow Valley Concert Series, and for Writing from the Heart. I joined a nearby church attended by many Willow Valley residents. Its adult Bible class expanded my thinking, and its after-church lunch group widened my circle of friends. At the same time, I continued meeting with my Gang of Four, a study discussion group begun a decade earlier. We were an unlikely mix. Jim W., a pastor, Jim H., a counselor, Roger, an advertising consultant, and myself, a theologian. Meeting together weekly, we had grown close, able to share anything. In January and February of this year, I awoke every morning eager to begin my whirlwind of activities. Then suddenly COVID-19 came and erased every one of those joys. The virus spread silently westward from Wuhan, girdling the globe to Europe in 2 short months, and then leaping the Atlantic. Terrifying stories emerged from New York City's hospitals. America was totally unprepared. Insufficient beds, ventilators, masks, gowns, gloves, and swabs. With Washington's ineptitude, every state, county, and city was on its own. Soon, COVID-19 came to Lancaster. 2/3 of our county's fatalities were in nursing homes or retirement communities like Willow Valley. Suddenly, I had become a prime target. Like most Americans, I didn't like using the word evil. But how could you describe a pandemic infecting 13 million people worldwide and killing 500,000 of them as anything less than evil? Did others feel the same way? I decided to call my next-door neighbor. "Do you use the word evil?" I asked. "Only when talking about you," she quipped. Ignoring the dig, I continued, "Is novel coronavirus evil?" "Absolutely." "What about systemic racism?" George Floyd's murder was on everybody's mind. "Is racism evil?" I asked. "Definitely," she replied. When Willow Valley residents were advised to pair off and check on each other daily, she agreed to be my partner. We would telephone each other every morning. "What will you do if I don't answer?" I asked. "Call security and tell them to bring a body bag," she replied. In late March, Willow Valley Communities issued an edict quarantining the community. No visitors from outside. And any resident who traveled outside the county had to self-quarantine for 2 weeks. That canceled our family Easter celebration in Baltimore. Further restrictions followed. Stay in place, no visiting in each other's dwellings, frequent hand washing, safe distancing, masks in public places. What a downer. We felt like prisoners locked in our cells. Now our problems were loneliness and boredom. Cabin fever began to set in. Soon, Willow Valley, however, launched its answer to boredom, a series of TV lectures, concerts, and special programs on the in-house channel. I especially enjoyed lectures on Da Vinci, Degas, and Cézanne, the canals of Venice and the Panama Canal, the pharaohs, the Medici, and the Russian Tsars. It was impossible to take in all the good programs offered. Another antidote to loneliness was Zoom. With Zoom, our gang of four met virtually. Conversations once again bounced back and forth among us. We dissected readings and wrestled with current events, but our priority was sharing our joys and sorrows with each other. During one session, Jim H. noted that in COVID-19 wards, people either die alone or die holding the hand of a stranger, a masked caretaker, comforting them as they slip away. Would you rather die alone, I asked Roger, or with your family present? I'd want my wife there holding my hand, Roger answered. But if you go first, then she'll have to die alone. True. Maybe if I were there when she goes, I'd be willing to face death alone. Zoom also brought back writing from the heart. Laughter and occasional tears filled the screen as we recovered meaningful memories. And Zoom allowed my clan to gather virtually. My two oldest grandsons displayed the product of their labors during the quarantine. They had painted the entire inside of the house with the help of their father. My other two grandsons showed off Ovi, the Labrador retriever, which they had rescued from a lab shelter. Ovi bounced around the screen, licking faces. Even before all this took place, creative juices began flowing in my cul-de-sac, which consists of 11 houses surrounded by a circular road. Let's gather in the circle every Saturday at 5, one of the residents suggested. Put on your mask, set your chairs 6 feet apart in a circle, bring your own bottle, and we'll have a party. The first Saturday was so much fun. We stayed until descending darkness drove us back into our isolation booths. The following Saturday, a resident from the next cul-de-sac sneaked in. I heard your laughter, she said, and I had to crash the party. She's still crashing the party. In June, we planned a surprise for a resident with a special connection to a Roman summer solstice festival. Ideas sparked from person to person as the festival took shape. An eternal flame was central to the ancient festival, so I asked permission to have a small charcoal fire. Absolutely not, the administrator declared. Just a little small fire in a small brazier, I pleaded. Absolutely not. Well then, how about tiki torches? I'm not saying yes, but I'm not saying no. Permission granted. Everything came off beautifully. The astonished roastee said she hadn't had so much fun in months. Independence Day fell on a Saturday a few weeks later. I suggested that we organize our own 4th of July celebration. Response was lukewarm. Who will volunteer to take charge, I asked. It's your idea, so you do it, was the unanimous response. I did have an idea. COVID-19 had exposed America's institutional racism, and George Floyd's murder had rubbed it raw. White America was waking up to 4 centuries of Black oppression. This year's celebration, I proposed, should highlight the dark underside of American history. We opened with excerpts from the Declaration of Independence and the Gettysburg Address. A resident then read Caroline Randall Williams' stunning op-ed from the New York Times, "My Body is a Confederate Monument." Another read Strange Fruit, Abel Meeropol's bombshell poem about lynching. I followed with Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. We concluded by singing the Black national anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, or rather, I sang it because no one else knew it. People stayed another hour, enjoying each other's company. We were beginning to bond like a family. As we broke up, one participant said, "I'm going to miss these gatherings when they come to an end." The next morning, we were surprised to find on the front page of Sunday's Lancaster newspaper a feature essay on Lift Every Voice and Sing. I immediately emailed my thanks to the author, Jeff Hawks, attaching a copy of our program. He emailed back, "I think your Independence Day program was spot on, stirring, meaningful, and thought-provoking." During one of our family Zoom meetings, my son remarked, "Because of the lockdown, our family has done more things together, and we've grown closer." I, too, have found such unanticipated side effects. Indeed, my experience of our 6-month lockdown has been as much positive as negative. Largely, I suppose, because the virus hasn't touched me personally. That is, until a recent Zoom meeting of the Gang of Four. 3 of us appeared on screen, but not Roger. A phone call revealed that he was in the ICU with severe anemia. Tests disclosed he also had something more scary, a positive test for COVID-19. Suddenly, the virus was blowing its hot breath in our faces. "Did you have any symptoms?" I asked. "No, it was a complete surprise." "What caused it?" "I haven't a clue. We've been so cautious we haven't even gone shopping. Groceries and meds are delivered outside our door." The following week, Roger appeared on screen looking strong as ever. "Still no symptoms," he said proudly. We breathed a collective sigh of relief, but saved celebration until his 14-day quarantine is over. Even then, any celebration will be muted by the spike in new cases nationally and locally. Dr. Fauci says the upturn is not the second wave, just the end of the beginning of the first wave. We have a long way to go.
Thank you, Dick. I thought that was terrific. What I'd like to do now, before we open it up to any general questions, is just ask first Joyce and then Dick, what challenges did you find as you were writing this memoir? Joyce, do you want to go ahead?
Okay, sure. The requirement was for not more than 1,500 words. And that's hard to do when you're trying to set the scenes and cover the descriptions of people and trying to tell how people were thinking and how I was thinking. Okay, so I had several points that I wanted to cover. The dialogue that I have in my story is what was really said and how that really went. I had to figure out how to piece 2 hours together, how to pick out from 2 hours and piece it all together to be a story that had some progress, some movement. You can't just, tell the facts. You have to incorporate things that will lead the reader from one point to another without abruptly confusing things. So those were pretty much the challenges. Dawn was really very good to start this memoirs club. It helped me a lot. One thing is it got me started writing again, and I realized I had written a story in 1991 and tucked it away. I found it recently. I said, oh my goodness, well, look, now I'm really writing enthusiastically and consistent. I'm writing with purpose now. So that I was thankful for Dawn, and the story I presented, I wasn't sure if it would be accepted. I wasn't sure if it would be enough about COVID-19 or if it would be maybe taking the thing too lightly. I was kind of worried about what my friends might say when they say, oh, look, she's been going out with these strangers. I don't think we don't want to get too close to her for a while, Okay, so, but anyway, I was glad that Dawn accepted the story, his publisher accepted the story, and I feel good about being here this morning. Thank you, Dawn.
Okay. Thank you, Joyce. Dick, how about yourself? We've got a couple minutes left for
Well, my
thoughts.
initial problem was that I hadn't really experienced personally COVID-19, nor had any in my family or in my circle of friends. So who would want to read my banal account of the various ways I lived during those 6 months? And then when I finished writing it, it was too long. And I had to figure out, what am I going to leave out? And that was almost as difficult as writing it in the first place.
Okay, good points. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from, okay, no questions. So what I'd like to do, we mentioned we have memoirs from healthcare workers and musicians and singers, and we also have memoirs from 8 elementary school students. And I'd like to read one of those as we close. And I think you'll enjoy listening to the future generation. The group that student authors are from the 6th grade students. They attend Central Preston Middle School in West Virginia. Their essays are part of a summer social studies assignment about how the students were living history at this time in their lives, and asked how they would tell that story. And this is a story that we received from Riley. Riley Ruggles is 12 years old. And I'd like to share her story with you as we end. My life in quarantine was kind of awful, but also good, in a way. It was awful because the last day we were in school, but we didn't know it, was the St. Patrick's Day dance. We were doing our work in social studies when all of a sudden the monitor started speaking. "May I have your attention, please?" Our social studies teacher, Mrs. Schubert, quieted us all down. Due to COVID-19, and after-school activities will be canceled from today and on out until future notice, or something like that. But then everyone started talking at once. They were saying things like, "That means the dance is canceled. That can't be. So I guess I won't be playing basketball now." And while everyone else was talking, I was wondering, how will we do classes if we can't come to school? But there are a few bright spots in the pandemic. While I'm doing schoolwork, I can eat whatever I want, whenever I want. And I get to spend more time with my family, and I get to relax more. And just remember, reader, we will overcome this, and if it happens to you, just do what we did. First, wash your hands. Second, stay 6 feet apart from one another. Wear a face mask. If you think you have symptoms, go to the hospital. Don't stay in large groups of people. And most importantly, don't go crazy over buying toilet paper like we did, okay? So that was Riley's thoughts. What I'd like to do is thank Dick and Joyce for their participation, and I hope you enjoyed our program. Thank you very much for attending.